Hey everyone, this is Mike from the Comic Book Trove here today with another Omnibus review, and today I'm going to be taking a look at a book which is so great to finally see being reprinted. This was out of print for a long time, probably 10 years or more I'd say. It was seriously hard to find, and as a big X-Men fan and as a Silver Age Marvel fan in general, I'm really happy to finally say that I've got the X-Men Omnibus Volume 1 in my collection. And today I'm going to be showcasing this book. We're going to look through it, I'll share some of my thoughts about the material. Hopefully give you some insight into what it's like, maybe help you out if you're on the fence about whether to pick this one up or not. So let's take a look. Firstly, Dust Jacket then. Really pleased to have this DM cover as well, I've got to say. You know, the standard variant is a recreation of this Jack Kirby cover by Alex Ross. And whilst I think Alex Ross is a great artist and I generally like his work, for some reason his version of this just never really did it for me. So really pleased to get the classic Kirby cover on the Dust Jacket here. Taking a look around the rest of the Dust cover, we've got the spine with the small font, as is standard now. You've got your tiny little creator names way down there. So we've got Stan Lee, Roy Thomas, Jack Kirby and Werner Roth. On the back we've got the cover gallery, so nice display of all the different comics collected in here. Standard stuff for most Marvel Omnibus, especially the Silver Age ones. And we see down here collecting the X-Men issues 1 to 31. So a pretty simple, straight run of 31 issues. There is a second volume of this, which is being reprinted very soon, and I'll be taking a look through that as well when that comes in. And that collects the rest of the Silver Age run, prior to the X-Men's cancellation and their years in kind of limbo, really, in no man's land, before the series was eventually revitalized. But that's not what we're looking at here. That's going further down the line. I'm jumping ahead in X-Men history. So here we go, let's take a look. The X-Men Omnibus Volume 1, the very beginning, where it all started. So initially we've got Stan Lee, he writes the first 19 issues, and Jack Kirby penciling the first 17. And then main other writer being Roy Thomas, who took over from issue 20 and wrote a lot of the rest of the series actually, right up until its cancellation. And Werner Roth, who pencils a lot of the material in here. And yeah, so all right, we've got a contents page here. Always nice to see that, and just get the issues laid out in a nice chronological order. See the publication dates, always a nice touch. There are some intros throughout here by Stan Lee. First one here being written in 1987, so that in itself is a piece of history. And then we jump into the X-Men #1. Now, what I will say about this before we really get too far into it is that it's a very different period of X-Men history. You know, the X-Men overall, I don't mean in just this issue, but throughout the whole Silver Age, didn't necessarily get off to the strongest start. And, you know, ultimately, as I've already mentioned, it did end up being cancelled. So for that reason, I don't really recommend this as a starting point, even though it is obviously the very beginning. And in some cases, I do think that that is good to start in the Silver Age. For example, with Fantastic Four and Amazing Spider-Man, I think that they're well worth reading from the very beginning. In terms of the X-Men, I would jump ahead and start with Chris Claremont's run if you're new to the X-Men personally. But this is certainly interesting to see how it all began. Now, firstly, one of the things that always just kind of looks weird to me is this very early design of Iceman, where he looks more like a snowman. I mean, he's even making a joke here of pretending to be a snowman. But yeah, doesn't really look like the Iceman design that we'd see later on, even just in this run, never mind later on down the years. Another funny thing is that Scott Summers initially is called Slim Summers. I feel like that's a bit of trivia that often goes under the radar. In the first couple of issues, his name was Slim. I mean, that later gets played down as having been a nickname, but it was clearly his original name, because even in this first part where Jean Grey comes in, she is introduced to the other members of the school by Professor X, and he formally introduces them all by their full names and refers to Scott as Slim Summers. Slim Summers, our human Cyclops. And everyone's calling him Slim. I mean, that's just something you never ever hear about. The fact that Scott Summers was originally called Slim Summers. It doesn't last long, to be fair. I mean, after I think a couple of issues, they changed his name to Scott. But anyway, I just thought that was kind of funny. But yeah, so let's see what else we got. We've got the introduction of many key characters in here. We've got a lot of first appearances in this run. So Magneto appears for the first time in the first issue. obviously we've got the original team. So the original team lineup being Cyclops, Marvel Girl, Jean Grey, the Beast, Hank McCoy, Angel, Warren Worthington III, and Iceman Bobby Drake. The Beast is initially not blue, so I feel like most people are going to know the Beast best as being kind of covered in blue fur. That doesn't happen at any point during this Silver Age material. He is just looking very human. He's got his powers, so he's very agile. He's stronger than most people. And he's got these kind of, I suppose, beastly features that inspire his name. So he's got these big feet and hands. But he doesn't turn blue until many years after this. I think it's actually during some Avengers issues that ends up happening. Professor X is very much a kind of stoic and stern teacher figure. I actually think that Professor X is the weakest part of Silver Age material. I think that the dynamic between him and the team kind of holds it back from being as fun as it could have been, because he's very much this strict teacher. You know, they are all very much the students who are constantly needing his permission to do things, you know, and it's just little lines that just kind of take the fun out of it. Like, for example, they'll be doing a workout in the danger room, and then Professor X will say something like, okay, you've all performed satisfactorily. Have 5 minutes of free time and report back for the next objective or something like that. You know, it's just very formal. I think at times it almost stops the characters from having real personalities of their own, because they spend so much time having to just do what Professor X is instructing them as their mentor and teacher. But anyway, that's something that I feel does die down a little bit, but initially that comes on very strong, that whole teacher-student relationship. In issue 3 here, we get the first appearance of the Blob, a character who's, of course, been a recurring character ever since, appeared many times over the years. And his whole thing, for those who don't know, is like he's very huge. Like he just looks like a big fat guy, but he's actually incredibly strong, kind of like an immovable object. Most physical forces cannot move him. And then we get the next kind of big thing, really, issue 4. So a lot of significant appearances here. Overall, it's the team appearance of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. So that team appears for the first time. And included in there are Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, who, so both first appear here and initially start out as villains, working with Magneto. Later on, Magneto is revealed to be their dad. They don't know that here. Don't discover it for quite a long time afterwards, actually. But bit interesting to kind of read it in retrospect when you know that's been revealed already, obviously, down the line. And of course, Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch quickly reform, become heroes, and join the Avengers not too long after this. But it's always interesting to see these early beginnings of characters like that, especially when they start out as villains. And honestly, Magneto and the Brotherhood are probably the most recurring villains throughout this whole era of X-Men. They turn up quite a lot. And the thing about Magneto as well, obviously he's I would say anyway, he's a great character, one of the great Marvel villains, but he's really quite, I suppose, simple in his goals at this point. He is just very much a classic villain. He is pretty much out to just destroy humanity. He believes mutants are superior. Really doesn't get developed into a more complex character until Chris Claremont took the reins and worked on him. Gave him much more of a backstory where he established that he'd been a Holocaust survivor. Made him more morally complex, I would say. More like an anti-hero at times. But yeah, here he's much more kind of one-dimensional, very much just a straight-up villain. So issue 7 we already see, we've got the Brotherhood and the Blob. I think Magneto tries to recruit the Blob around here. Don't think he joins them though. So as we're going through here, I'm sure you're getting a good idea of what the book is like. The Silver Age style is obviously very strong, quite dated really in the way it's all laid out. A lot of dialogue, very text heavy, makes it, generally speaking, it makes it so that it's much longer to read through an issue of this than more modern comics. I always say I've reviewed a few Silver Age books on my channel now, and I always say I totally understand people who can't get into this era of comics. And, you know, even as both an X-Men and a Silver Age fan, I've got to be upfront and say that this is not amongst Marvel's best Silver Age material. For me, just because I am a big X-Men fan, I've got to have this. I've got to read the early history. I enjoy it more, I suppose, from its historical significance than because of the actual quality of the stories, which isn't to say there's nothing fun in here at all. But it's just, yeah, it's not even on the same level whatsoever as when Chris Claremont's run gets going later on. And I read through the whole Claremont run long before I read any of this Silver Age stuff. So for anybody who happens to be wondering, would you be lost if you started there and you hadn't read this stuff? No, you really, really, really wouldn't be lost at all, I'm sure. Because anything you need to know gets recapped. And most of it you just don't need to know. Stopped here just to pause on the introduction of the character Kazar, or Kazar. I always pronounced it Kazar, but I hear a lot of people say Kazar. But anyway, yeah, he first appears here, X-Men issue 10, along with his saber-toothed tiger Zabu, and his homeland, the Savage Land, which is this kind of prehistoric, lost world preserved under Antarctica. It's full of dinosaurs and monsters and all sorts of stuff, cavemen, cults, all kinds of crazy stuff going on down there. And it's really cool. I think the Savage Land is great. I think in particular, my favourite Savage Land story is the one where the X-Men go down there in the Chris Claremont and John Byrne collaboration. I think that's around issue, off the top of my head, I think 112 or something like that. Around that point, anyway. But yeah, obviously, keep getting sidetracked. There's just so many things that come to mind when I'm looking at X-Men books. My mind kind of jumps all over the place. What have we got? Oh yeah, Juggernaut. First appearance of the Juggernaut here, issue 12. Kane Marco. For the longest time, I myself thought he was a mutant, prior to really reading any stories with him a few years ago. Because obviously, I mean, he shows up often as an X-Men villain. I think it's easy to see why the misconception is there that a lot of people think he's an evil mutant. But no, he gets his powers from a magic jewel. I think it's, can't remember exactly what it's called, like an amulet of Sitarak or something like that. That gives him his super strength and unstoppable force. Interesting to see his original costume here, where he's basically wearing shorts. I think definitely looks much better when the costume changed and became a full body suit of armor. Just kind of looks like an egg with arms and legs here. Yeah, I mean, there's first appearances, to be fair, about in this run. You've got to give it this. A lot of significant first appearances just keep coming. So we've got issue 14 and the Sentinels first appear. Sentinels being giant robotic mutant hunters. They've plagued the X-Men and mutants in general for basically all of the X-Men's history. And I think here we see the creator, or the AI, the machine that creates the Sentinels, the master mold. Yeah, I think there's certainly some fun stuff in here. You know, I cannot say I like it as much as Amazing Spider-Man or Fantastic Four, or even like Thor or the Avengers. You know, all those things probably rank above this amongst the other Silver Age Marvel stuff from the 60s. But yeah, I do definitely enjoy this overall. It's a fun thing to read. I think probably the way that I tend to read this sort of stuff, and it's probably how I'd recommend anybody else generally do it, is that I don't binge it. I tend to read a couple of issues at a time, like in a day, for example, like 2 issues a day, and then, you know, a couple of issues the next day or so, and just break it down like that. I think what's easy to forget when you have comics in collected editions like this is that, you know, the comics were not originally intended to be read back to back to back. they released one a month, obviously, you know. So back at the time where these were coming out, nobody was reading through 30 issues in a few days, you know. So I think it's natural that if you try reading through a huge chunk of them at once, you quickly get burned out. The Mimic. So yeah, it's a character who, yeah, is sort of significant, I guess, in X-Men history, but for the most part, I think he's really a more forgotten character. He basically can mimic other people, so that's his whole thing. And as with most other 60s Marvel books, there's a fair amount of throwaway villains as well, characters who have not stood the test of time. So, you know, for all your Magnetos, Juggernauts and Sentinels, you get much more, or much less I should say, interesting and iconic characters like Dominus here. Great example. But it's that weird quirkiness of the Silver Age stories that I particularly sort of like, I suppose. It's quite endearing. It makes me just sort of smile to myself, really, and just enjoy it on the level of how cheesy and odd it can be. Got an introduction here from Roy Thomas. This is really starting to get to the point where his run starts. So he's scripting it now. Art's here by Jay Gavin. So Kirby has left the book at this point. Well, Stan Lee and Kirby have left the book at this point. And I think, you know, the artwork mostly tends to go down in quality after Kirby's departure. Kirby, obviously a great artist, classic, iconic look that he gave all these characters, even from an early stage. Yeah, so Werner Roth comes on here, starts drawing it, and the book does just start to lose a kind of distinct visual style, really. So Kirby gave it a specific look. Kirby gave everything a specific look that he drew. And here it just kind of looks like generic artwork, I think, which is not to say it's bad, really. It just doesn't stand out, in my opinion. Maybe you feel differently, but I don't really ever see or hear anybody mention Roth as being one of the all-time great artists, either on X-Men or anything in general. Again, not trying to put the guy down. I don't personally see a hugely appealing style here. But it's a lot of history, a lot of great history contained in here. It's great to see it re-released and make it available again, because this book sold for crazy money, honestly. Like, not even exaggerating. I saw this for thousands of pounds sometimes on eBay and things like that, on the rare occasions it did show up. Absolutely insane. And I'm sure as you take a look through here, you're getting a good idea, if you didn't already know, as to whether or not you think this is for you or not. But yeah, we're kind of early on. I think sort of first half of this particular omnibus is where you're getting most of the significant appearances. As the run goes on, you don't get so many of those. Although there is one more interesting one to come. The Mimic, he's back again. All three of you Mimic fans out there, enjoying seeing him in here, I'm sure. But the next issue, though, issue 28, is one I do remember. It's another memorable first appearance, and it's the Banshee, Sean Cassidy. Starts out as kind of a villain, although he's being sort of forced to be a villain, and then later on, of course, becomes a member of the team, and then even after he's not a member, he's still a semi-regular supporting character, an ally of the team. But again, I'm jumping ahead to Chris Claremont's run with that. Really, I've got to say again, just to reiterate, I wouldn't start here unless you're already pretty familiar with the X-Men and you've read later stuff and you just want to come back and check this out of curiosity because you want to see how it all began. Then obviously, fair enough. but I really would much more strongly recommend, as a starting point to the X-Men, I'd start with Chris Claremont's run every day. I read through all that run before I read any of this, and it was never an issue. And at the end of the day, the difference between these two eras is this X-Men series ended up being cancelled because it was performing so poorly, and under Chris Claremont's stewardship as a writer, it became Marvel's best-selling book for years in the 80s. So that alone is really testimony for the difference in quality, I think. But I think that volume 2 of the Silver Age collection, so the second volume that's soon to be released and will continue the material that's in here, I think that that is overall stronger, because you see some more interesting things happen in there, like the X-Men, they get their own individual costumes. So in here they're wearing those yellow and black uniforms. I know they look blue a lot of the time, but that's just how they're supposed to be shaded, so you can see them more distinctly. But these are the ones I'm talking about. Obviously these yellow and blue ends up being the costumes that the New Mutants wear years later. But yeah, they change the costumes. They finally get their own unique costumes in volume 2. We get artwork by Jim Steranko and Neil Adams in that book. And I think it's just overall a bit more interesting. But this, you know, as I say, this is very, very fascinating to read, certainly from a historical perspective. Quite a lot of sort of afterwords collected in here. Then we get the extras, so it's a pretty cool poster there, well, t-shirt art technically, and then some original Kirby pencils, always great to see. These are from issue 1. An unused cover there by Jack Kirby, unused cover by Werner Roth. And then in the back you get the usual sort of extras that you often see in these Silver Age Marvel books. You get a lot of covers that reprinted the material. So these Amazing Adventures covers, Marvel Tales, that sort of thing. Just other sort of bits and pieces in here as well. Some more covers, then you get some trade paperback designs, and that's the Alex Ross variant as well. It was the other cover for this omnibus, and as I say, just doesn't look so great to me. I don't know why really, but just never really appealed. But yeah, anyway, so that's a look at this omnibus. Hopefully it's been useful to see it. For me, it's still a little bit difficult just to believe I'm holding it, you know what I mean? It's like one of those books that for a long time, I'd given up on ever actually having, so really, really cool that Marvel finally decided to reprint it, along with all the other long out of print books that they've been reprinting lately. I think it's a great time, really, to be in the omnibus game. But again, thank you very much for watching. I hope it was interesting and insightful in some way, and I will be back again soon. We'll discuss another book review. I think the next one up could be Hulk Omnibus Volume 1, another Silver Age book which is being reprinted. Should be getting that soon. And certainly I will cover it when it gets in. That's another exciting one. But enough for now. I've gone on long enough. I'll be back again soon with another video. Thanks again, guys.